My mother never came to meet me at Bursley Station when I arrived in the Five Towns from London, and much less did she come as far as Knype Station, which is the great traffic centre of the district, the point at which one changes from the express into the local train. She had always other things to do. She was preparing for me. So, I had the little journey from Knype to Bursley, and then the walk up Trafalgar Road, amid the familiar high chimneys and the smoke and the clay mud and the football posters and the Midland accent, all by myself. And there was leisure to consider anew how I should break to my mother the tremendous news I had for her. I'd been considering that question ever since getting into the train at Euston, where I'd said goodbye to Agnes. But in the atmosphere of the Five Towns, it seemed just slightly more difficult. Though, of course, it wasn't difficult, really. You see, I wrote to my mother regularly every week, telling her most of my doings. She knew all my friends by name. I dare say she formed in her mind notions of what sort of people they were. Thus, I'd frequently mentioned Agnes and her family in my letters. But you can't write even to your mother and say in cold blood, I think I'm beginning to fall in love with Agnes. I think Agnes likes me. I'm mad on her. I feel certain she likes me. I shall propose to her on such a day. You can't do that. At least I couldn't. Hence it had come about that on the 20th of December, I'd proposed to Agnes. I had been accepted by Agnes, and my mother had no suspicion that my happiness was so near. And on the 22nd, by a previous and unalterable arrangement, I'd come to spend Christmas with my mother. I was the only son of a widow. I was all that my mother had, and lo, I'd gone and engaged myself to a girl she'd never seen, and I'd kept her in the dark. She'd certainly be extremely surprised, and she might be a little bit hurt, just at first. Anyhow, the situation was, the least in the world, delicate. I walked up the whitened front steps of my mother's little house, just opposite where the electric cars stop. But before I could put my hand on the bell, my little plump mother, in her black silk, with a gold brooch and her auburn hair, opened to me, having doubtless watched me down the road from the bay window as usual. And she said as usual, kissing me, "Well, Philip, how are you?" And I said, "Oh, I'm all right, Mother. How are you?" I perceived instantly that she was more excited than my arrival ordinarily made her. There were tears in her smiling eyes, and she was as nervous as a young girl. She did indeed look remarkably young for a woman of 45, with 25 years of widowhood and a brief but too tempestuous married life behind her. The thought flashed through my mind, by some means or other, she's got wind of my engagement. How? But I said nothing. Well, I too was naturally rather nervous. Mothers can be touchy creatures. I'll tell her at supper, I decided. And she hovered round me like a seagull round a steamer as I went upstairs. There was a ring at the door. She flew instead of letting the servant go. It was a porter with my bag. Just as I was coming downstairs again, there was another ring at the door, and my mother appeared magically out of the kitchen, but I was beforehand with her, and with a laugh I insisted on opening the front door myself this time. A young woman stood on the step. "Please, Mrs. Dawson wants to know if Mrs. Durrance can kindly lend her half a dozen knives and forks." "With pleasure," said my mother behind me. "Just wait a minute, Lucy. Come inside on the mat." I followed my mother into the drawing-room where she kept her silver in a cabinet. "That's Mrs. Dawson's new servant," my mother whispered. "But she needn't think I'm going to lend her my best, because I'm not." "Oh, I shouldn't if I were you," I supported her. And she went out with some second best in tissue paper and beamed on Mrs. Dawson's servant with an assumed benevolence. "There," she exclaimed, "and the compliments of the season to your mistress, Lucy." And after that, my mother disappeared into the kitchen to worry an entirely capable servant. And I roamed about, feeling happily excited, examining the drawing-room, in which nothing was changed except the incandescent light and the picture postcards on the mantelpiece. And then I wandered into the dining-room, a small room at the back of the house, and here an immense surprise awaited me. Supper was set for 3. Well, I reflected, here's a nice state of affairs. Supper for 3, and she hasn't breathed a word. My mother was so clever in social matters, and especially in the planning of delicious surprises, that I believed her capable even of miracles. In some way or other, she must have discovered the state of my desires towards Agnes. She'd written or something. She and Agnes had been plotting together a letter to startle me, perhaps telegraphing. Agnes had fibbed in telling me that she couldn't possibly come to Bursley for Christmas. She had delightfully fibbed. And my mother had got her concealed somewhere in the house, or was momentarily expecting her. That explained the tears, the nervousness, the rushes to the door. I crept out of the dining room, determined not to let my mother know that I'd secretly viewed the supper table. And as I was crossing the lobby to the drawing room, there was a third ring at the door, and a third time my mother rushed out of the kitchen. By Jove, I thought, suppose it's Agnes. What a scene! And trembling with excitement, I opened the door. It was Mr. Dixon. Now, Mr. Dixon was an old friend of the family's, man of 49 or 50, with a reputation for shrewdness and increasing wealth. He owned 175 cottages in the town, having bought them gradually in half dozens and in rows. He collected the rents himself and attended to the repairs himself, and was celebrated as a good landlord and as being almost the only man in Bursley who made cottage property pay. He lived alone in Commerce Street, and though not talkative, was usually jolly, with 1 or 2 good stories tucked away in the corners of his memory. He was my mother's trustee, and had morally aided her in the troublous times before my father's early death. "Well, young man," cried he, "so you're backing up Bosley?" It amused him to speak the dialect a little occasionally, and he brought his burly, powerful form into the lobby. I greeted him as jovially as I could, and then he shook hands with my mother, neither of them speaking. "Mr. Dixon is come for supper, Philip," said my mother. I liked Mr. Dixon, but I was not too well pleased by this information, for I wanted to talk confidentially to my mother. I had a task before me with my mother, and here Mr. Dixon was plunging into the supper. I couldn't break it gently to my mother that I was engaged to a strange woman in the presence of Mr. Dixon. Mr. Dixon had been in to supper several times during previous visits of mine, but never on the first night. However, I had to make the best of it. And we sat down and began on the ham, the sausages, the eggs, the crumpets, the toast, jams, mince tarts, Stilton and the celery. But we none of us ate very much, despite my plump little mother's protestations. My suspicion was that perhaps something had gone slightly wrong with my mother's affairs, and that Mr. Dixon was taking the first opportunity to explain things to me. But such a possibility didn't interest me, for I could easily afford to keep my mother and a wife too. I was still preoccupied in my engagement, and surely there's nothing astonishing in that. And I began to compose the words in which, immediately on the departure of Mr. Dixon after supper, I tackled my mother on the subject. When we reached the Stilton and celery, I intimated that I must walk down to the post office, as I had to dispatch a letter. "Won't it do tomorrow, my pet?" asked my mother. "It will not," I said. Imagine leaving Agnes 2 days without news of my safe arrival, and without assurances of my love. I'd started writing the letter in the train, near Willesden, and I finished it in the drawing-room. "Oh, lady in the case," Mr. Dixon called gaily. "Yes," I replied with firmness. I went forth, bought a picture postcard showing St. Luke's Square, Bursley, most untruthfully picturesque, and posted the card and the letter to my darling Agnes. I hoped that Mr. Dixon would have departed ere my return. He'd made no reference at all during supper to my mother's affairs. But he'd not departed. I found him solitary in the drawing-room, smoking a very fine cigar. "Where's the mater?" I demanded. "Oh, she's just gone out of the room," he said. "Yeah, come and sit down. Yeah, have one of these. Yeah, I want a bit of a chat with you, Philip." I obeyed, taking one of the very fine cigars. "Well, Uncle Dixon," I encouraged him, wishing to get the chat over because my mind was full of Agnes. I sometimes called him Uncle for fun. "Well, my boy," he began, "it's no use me beating about the bush. What do you think of me as a stepfather?" I was struck, as they say, all of a heap. "What? You don't mean to say you and Mother?" He nodded. "Yes, I do, lad. Yesterday she promised us she'd marry me unworthy self. Oh, it's been coming along for some time, but I don't expect she's given you any hint in her letters. Oh, in fact, I know she hasn't. It would have been rather difficult, wouldn't it? She couldn't well have written, 'My dear Philip, an old friend, Mr. Dixon, is falling in love with me, and I believe I'm falling in love with him. One of these days he'll be proposing to me.' She couldn't have written like that, could she?" I laughed. I couldn't help it. "Shake hands," I said warmly. "I'm delighted." And soon afterwards, my mother sidled in shyly. "The lad's delighted, Sarah," said Mr. Dixon shortly. I said nothing about my own engagement that night. I'd never thought of my mother as a woman with a future. I'd never realized that she was desirable and that a man might desire her, and that her lonely existence in that house was not all that she had a right to demand from life. And I was ashamed of my characteristic, filial, selfish egoism. So I decided that I'd not intrude my joy on hers until the next morning. We live and learn.